As you know, my first commandment is know thyself. For me, there's no rule or principle more important than this. It's something that I think about literally every day, and it's something that I really and truly attempt to live by. Yet despite the amount of effort and energy that I put into this practice, I still regularly discover these glaring inconsistencies, weaknesses, and blind spots just laying there in plain sight. In other words, despite the fact that I try my hardest to know myself as I truly am, warts and all, I still manage to trick myself on a regular basis. Last night, my wife helped me discover one of these inconsistencies. I immediately felt that mixture of shame and relief that comes from catching yourself red-handed. For the first time, though, I felt something different. I felt gratitude. Part of me was extremely happy because I think on some level this inconsistency had been bothering me for quite some time. I think that underneath the surface, a part of me knew that this wasn't right, that the way I was behaving in this particular scenario did not align with the beliefs and principles that I attempt to live by. It was staring me in the face all along, which is what makes it all the more ironic. It was something that I could see very, very clearly and that I was aware of on some level, but not to the extent that it was shown to me last night in this conversation that I had with my wife. So after having this conversation, I started to ponder this question, which I have pondered many times before. Why is it so fucking hard to know yourself? Why is it so difficult to truly, fully know yourself? It seems like no matter how much you try and no matter how many practices you develop and clever tricks you come up with to study yourself and observe yourself, there's always these big, huge blind spots, these startling and disturbing discoveries that come up on a regular basis. I feel like there's no end to the amount of flaws and weaknesses that plague me. And every time I think that I've gotten most of them, I find a fresh batch just around the corner, right outside my front door. So why is it so hard to know yourself? And why is it that we fool ourselves so easily? Before we dive into it though, I think I should probably tell you some of the particulars of the story so that you get a sense of what I mean when I say I had this blind spot. So basically, my wife has known this group of people for years, and by virtue of my marriage to her, I've known these people for a while as well. And it became apparent to me after a few years that these people were actually taking advantage of my wife. My wife is a people pleaser, and there are some people out there who like to take advantage of those types of individuals. The people who can't say no, who feel guilty saying no, who feel obligated to help you, do favors for you, or whatever. My wife used to be like that. She's still a little bit like that, but she's working on it because she's become aware that this is part of her character. So anyways, for a number of years, certain individuals in this group of people, I felt, were taking advantage of her. They were taking her for granted. They were not giving her credit where it was due. There was a bunch of issues, at least in my eyes. And when that kind of stuff happens to my loved ones, my family, my friends, the people who are close to me, I tend to go into dick mode. And so anyways, for the last few years, that's been my sort of default state toward these people. Not in like an overt way, but more in like a passive-aggressive, don't make eye contact, don't say hi, don't talk to you type of way. For a number of years, I was actually on friendly terms with these people. So it went from, me being friendly, having a good time with these people, and now, boom, I'm just a total fucking douchebag. So anyways, my wife helped me realize that my sort of frustration or my hostilities toward these people was, in a way, the result of me feeling protective toward my wife. felt like these people had taken advantage of her, and so I felt the need to retaliate. But what my wife said was, you think you're protecting me, but you're just keeping me weak. I have to learn how to handle these types of situations. I have to develop the skills and the character traits to deal with these types of situations when they come up. And this is part of my wife's path. I'm not going to talk about that because that's her business, but we all have a path. We all have changes that we want to make. But in any case, so that's the story. That's what happened. My wife and I were talking about this, and it came up, and I realized for someone who claims that it feels good to do good, for someone who claims that humans all belong to the same family and that we have to be compassionate towards one another, for someone who volunteers and tries to do good in the community and tries to be nice to strangers, how I behave towards these people is absolutely inconsistent with all of that. So in this one area of my life, I realized that I was being a total hypocrite, that I wasn't living out my values. I wasn't living out my truth the way that I should have been. And the moment that it clicked for me last night, it felt so good. Like I said, there was a bit of shame there and embarrassment, but this isn't the first time, man. This isn't my first rodeo, guys. I discover these types of things on a regular basis. This just so happens to be a really big one. Anyways, what I really feel is gratitude and joy because now I get to rectify this situation. But this brought up an interesting question for me. Why is it so fucking hard to know yourself? That's what I want to know. I think I found a couple of new answers, a couple of new explanations that I hadn't sort of connected before. There are things that I have thought about before, but I never connected them as obstacles to true knowledge of self. So here they are. Obstacle number 1, the idea that you already know yourself. That's the first obstacle to true knowledge of self. Because over the years, I've met a number of people who claimed to know themselves really, really well. But upon closer observation, it became apparent to me, or at least it appeared to me, that these people were totally fooling themselves. The same way I'd been fooling myself with regard to this group of people I was telling you about. Self-deception, the belief that you know yourself, that's the first obstacle to knowledge of self. If you think you know, you're never going to try to find out. The second obstacle is connected to the first, and it's the reason people believe they know themselves. Can you guess what it is? Labels! Whoop whoop! It's labels. Labels are an obstacle to true knowledge of self. And the more labels you identify with, the more labels you connect yourself to, the less likely you are to actually try and discover who you are. Because all of these labels fool you into thinking you know. Know thyself. Well, I know myself. All right, who are you? I'm Oliver. I'm 35. I'm a father of 3. I'm a husband. I'm a universalist. I'm a this. I'm a that. Oh, okay. Well, then you must know yourself. Why would you bother digging deeper if you already have all of these identifiers? So the second obstacle to knowledge of self is labels. And I fucking hate labels. I hate them. I think they're a source of so much suffering in this world, not because they're inherently bad in themselves, but because we have totally lost sight of what they are and their true purpose. Labels are helpful, they're convenient, but they are not a reality. They point to something that may or may not be real, but the label itself is not real. You're so much more than a cisgendered white female or a black male or a whatever you are. You're so much more than those labels that you identify with. And there are people out there marching and fighting about labels. You know, there's intersectionality and identity politics. What is identity politics? It's fucking labels, slinging labels at people, identifying oneself with a cause or a movement or an ideology. It's just labels. It's the source of so much suffering in the world. I was telling my wife last night, I think this is how the conversation started. I said, I don't know any humans. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I know a lot of men and women. I know a lot of parents. I know a lot of, insurance brokers. I know a lot of those, but I don't know any humans. I think I'm the only human I know. And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, I don't identify with my job. I don't identify with the roles I play. I don't feel like I am those things. I feel like those are things that I do. But what I am is a human being. I'm not Caucasian. I'm not a male. I'm not cisgendered. I'm not straight. I'm not any of those things. I'm just a human being. I am who I am. And there's no label that can contain me. And I would argue that the same is true for you. So, fuck labels. Now, of course, there are more obstacles to true knowledge of self. The fact that you're going to discover that you've been an asshat for a number of years, for example. But those other things, I think, are consequences of seeking knowledge of self. Once you start seeking the knowledge, then you're going to experience these uncomfortable moments, these moments of shame, regret, and all that kind of stuff, the gross feels. But remember, that's only if you actually start digging. And what I realized last night and throughout the day today is that there are so many obstacles preventing us from even starting on the search. And so I wanted to talk about those for a few minutes. So the two things that prevent people from beginning to know themselves: the idea that they already do know themselves, which I think everyone is guilty of to some extent, to some degree at some point in their lives, and an over-reliance on labels for a sense of self, for a sense of identity. I think those are the things that prevent people from going within and finding out what's really in there. Now, how do you overcome those obstacles and find a way within? Well, that's a topic for another video, my friends. So I guess you'll just have to tune in another day.